Welcome to another episode of the Vegan Pulse. I am your host, Nancy Arenas. Today, my guest is Gabriel Gaarden with another segment of Making Sense with Gabriel. Stick around. We'll be right back. Hi, Gabriel. Welcome back to Making Sense with Gabriel. How are you?
I'm doing well. How about you, Nancy?
I am doing extra special today.
Well, that's good to hear.
Just life is good.
Cool.
What are the best sources of healthy fats when eating plant-based?
Great question. So let's see. The first things that come to mind are going to be the higher fat plant foods. So think nuts and seeds. Those are rich in fats. And especially, we talked on another episode about omega-3s. Those are known as essential fatty acids, or fats or foods that we have to get through our diet. So those are things that our body can't manufacture on its own. Something that has to come in through our nutrition, through the food that we consume. And so those sources of omega-3 fats, things like ground flax seeds, ground chia seeds, it's important for people to know that in order to access those omega-3 fats, we have to grind them up first. So we can't eat whole flax seeds or whole chias, right? We want to grind them up. And hemp seeds, we can eat whole. We don't have to grind hemp seeds. Those are another great source for omega-3 fats. Our alpha-linolenic acid, which is the precursor to those long chain omega-3s in the body, DHA and EPA. So those are our heavy hitting seeds, flax, chia, and hemp. And then the heavy hitting nut in the crew that has a lot of omega-3 ALA is walnuts. But all the nuts are great, right? Just don't eat too many of them, especially if weight is a concern, because fat is the most energy dense or the most calorie dense of the macronutrients when we're thinking about carbs and protein and fats, right? 9 calories per gram in fats. And if you compare that to carbohydrate and protein, those two only have about 4 calories per gram. So per gram of weight, fat is more than twice as energy dense or twice as calorie dense. And so that's great because fats, of course, are very healthy for our body. They aid in the absorption of a number of vitamins and things in our body, especially the fat soluble vitamins like vitamin A, B, E, and K. Right? Vitamins A, D, E, and K, those are fat soluble vitamins. And so we need some fat in our diet. There's no reason to cut all the fat out of our diets, but fat's one of those nutrients that we need to be aware of, because if we're eating way too much of it, it can lead to something called passive overconsumption, where we just end up eating more calories than we need without even noticing it, especially when it comes hidden, right? Hidden fats, like if you're eating a pastry or a chip or a cookie, or some other form of bread, right, that uses a lot of butter or oil or different things inside of it, you don't really see the fat because you're just seeing a piece of bread or a muffin, right, or some other form of pastry. But many of those foods, those processed foods, are made with lots of added fats, and we call them hidden fats because we can't see them. And so we want to be aware again of any kind of ultra processed foods. It's great to choose whole plant foods because then you're seeing, oh, it's a nut or a seed, and I know it has a lot of fat in it. And I can be aware of the amount that I'm eating because I know those foods are very healthy for me. They're health promoting, but they're also really high in calories. And so I don't want to eat too many of them. So just like anybody who is on an omnivorous diet, I would recommend don't ever think of meat as the centerpiece, right? Think of it as just a garnish or just a condiment to be added to rice and beans and fruits and vegetables and things like this. I would say the same thing about nuts and seeds. Right. And ideally, of course, people aren't eating meat. But if they're eating things like nuts and seeds, which are also very energy or calorie dense, think of those things as a garnish or as a condiment. Right. So I can add a few, crushed like a few sesame seeds, toasted sesame seeds to an Asian dish. It adds a lot of flavor. I can add same thing, like some chopped up cashews to like a beautiful stir fry with tofu and broccoli and green beans and bell peppers. And then those cashews just add a little extra crunch. They're so tasty. They add that little bit of richness in our mouth from that fat that adds that extra flavor and texture that can make a meal, kind of elevate a meal to the next level, right? When we're adding some of that extra fat and texture. But I'll use it as a garnish. It won't be the centerpiece of the meal. The centerpiece will be all the vegetables that I've sauteed and the brown rice that I'm serving those vegetables on top of, and the tofu, that we sauteed on the skillet. And the nuts will just be the garnish to add that little extra punch, that little extra pizzazz. Also think about avocados, right? That's another source of really healthy monounsaturated fats. We always want to concentrate on unsaturated fats as opposed to saturated fats. And luckily enough, most of the saturated fats are concentrated in the animal kingdom, right? So animals tend to concentrate saturated fat when we're eating lots of beef and pork and lamb and chicken and all those other forms of animal products. Those have a lot of saturated fat, and saturated fat is really nasty. It's the key driver for the increase in LDL, which is the bad cholesterol that runs through our bloodstreams. And so saturated fat, you eat more of it, your LDL cholesterol goes up. And then guess what? LDL cholesterol is a key driver of heart disease, the #1 killer of Americans. So if we want to keep our LDL cholesterol down, we got to drive down that saturated fat, which means eating less or no animal foods. And then also watching out for foods like coconut oil and palm oil, because those happen to be really rich sources of saturated fat as well in the plant-based, world, right? Nothing wrong with eating a little bit here and there, right? But just beware. We shouldn't treat coconut oil or palm oil as health food, nor should we treat really olive oil or any form of oil as a health food. There's nothing wrong with adding a little bit of it in your stir fry or putting a little bit of, extra virgin olive oil on your tahini, or not your tahini, but your hummus that you make with tahini and garbanzo beans and garlic and roasted bell peppers or whatever you like to throw in your hummus. Nothing wrong with adding a little olive oil there. I just always tell people olive oil, right, or any other form of oil, it's a highly processed form of plant. We're removing the fiber. We're removing most of the beneficial nutrients that are found in a whole olive, that are found in other whole plant foods when we make an oil. And so that makes it easy, again, to consume too much of, because we're losing the fiber and those other things that help to fill our tummies full of good food that isn't too high in calories. So we end up eating too many calories, and it leads to things like overweight and obesity, right? So we be careful, not too many of the oils, but there's nothing wrong with some. Just keep it modest, right? And then eat more of those whole versions of fat from a plant-based diet. Avocado, nuts and seeds principally, right? Those are going to be your big ones, avocados and nuts and seeds. And then use oil again, with just to add a little extra flavor here and there, to your stir fry, to your hummus or other spread that you might be making, things like that. But olive oil, nonetheless, is one of your better oils, right? When we're thinking about oils, it's going to be better than like some of your more processed forms of vegetable oils. But be reaching for the forms of oil that are like, you look for things like cold pressed, because a lot of the oils, especially the cheaper ones, they'll do things like they add different chemicals or they add a lot of heat when they're processing the plants that they use to make those oils. And that'll tend to do things like oxidize the fats. And whenever we oxidize the fats, that can be a bad thing, right? And so cold pressed is better, less is better, right? We just want to be aware of the amount that we're eating. Just use it as something to add a little bit of extra flavor. I like to say use oil in a culinary sense, right? So you could use a teaspoon as opposed to like a quarter of a cup of olive oil when you're making a stir fry. Just use 1 or 2 teaspoons. And that'll still, because fat has the ability to kind of concentrate flavor. It'll help to like hold the flavor of spices when you're, sauteing your onions and your garlic and your other aromatic vegetables that you use right at the beginning when you're starting to cook a recipe. It can kind of, and then you're adding all your spices to it, your chili powder or your cumin or your coriander or whatever it might be. If you add a little oil, it can really help to kind of magnify the flavor of those aromatics and those spices. But it doesn't take very much to get that done. And so I say use it in a culinary sense. Use just enough to add that extra punch, that pizzazz, that flavor to a meal. But you don't have to dump a ton of oil on something to get that same mouthfeel and to get that same flavor punch that you could get by using just a little bit, right? And then you're not getting all those extra calories that can lead to weight gain. Or for people that are already dealing with overweight and obesity, it can kind of get in the way or be a crutch to them being able to lose that unwanted, body fat that they're hanging on to, because they're getting all these extra calories that they're not even realizing. But yeah, again, whole plant foods, right? Avocados, nuts, and seeds, those are the main things that we want to reach for when it comes to getting healthy forms of fat on a plant-based diet.
And you talked about staying away from the palm oil, the coconut oil, that the olive oil is still oil, a little bit healthier, but still stay away from using too much of it. What
Yeah.
about canola oil?
Canola oil is similar. I would say olive oil is better, but canola oil may be an oil. I don't ever use it personally. It may be an oil that works at a slightly higher temperature a little bit better when you're like sauteing something, on a griddle or something. Generally speaking, we want to avoid fried food is the worst, right? And of course, to fry something, we're always using oil to fry it. Now, there are air fryers, so that's a better option. You could use an air fryer, or you could use like your like a really, some people have like a fancy oven or something, a fancy convection oven that will cook things in a way that kind of air fries them and will get them nice and crispy. But anytime we cook a food at really high temperatures, which is something that's done during frying, um, that can tend to do some things to food that makes them a little less nutritious or a little less health promoting, especially high fat, high protein foods. And so this happens a lot with meat. And so for those of us on a vegan diet, we're bypassing this anyway. But we have all of our imitations or our plant-based alternatives to meat foods, right? That have high protein and high fat. And what tends to happen when you cook high protein, high fat foods at really high temperatures, so think of like broiling and frying and grilling, cooking over a flame, stuff like that. We can produce these compounds called AGEs, which are known as advanced glycation end products. And those are somewhat inflammatory, when they get into our systems and in our digestive system and our bodies are processing them, they can be inflammatory to our system. And so ideally, we're not cooking all the time foods that are high in fat and high in protein. So think of like plant-based meat alternatives, right? Because they're going to have, just like, a regular hamburger has a lot of fat and protein. A plant-based version of a hamburger also has a lot of fat and protein in it. And so if we're eating a lot of those on a regular basis that are like frame boiled or grilled or cooked or like fried on a skillet or something, that may not be ideal, right? But there's nothing wrong. Hey, eat it here and there, eat a hamburger here and there because, again, a plant-based version ideally because, you love hamburgers and you really want to eat one. Just don't eat it every day. Instead, reach for your bean chili, right? Or your vegetable and tofu saute or something like that as your go-tos, and try to eat those burgers a little bit less often.
Sounds great. Thank you, Gabriel, for another informative episode of Making Sense with Gabriel.
Thanks for having me on, Nancy. Great to see you.
Until the next time, take care and be healthy.
Cool. You too.
Thank you for watching another episode of The Vegan Pulse. I am your host, Nancy Arenas. Please like us on Facebook, check out our website, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you have a pulse, you have a purpose. Live vegan.